Welcome, listeners, to the latest episode of Future Secured. And today we're going to be covering a really interesting subject around how to train like you fight, building the cyber warriors of today. So, Jason and I are joined by Matt Wilcox, founder and CEO of Fifth Domain. Fifth Domain is a cybersecurity training company built to prepare SOC teams for the reality of modern cyber combat, not just compliance. With a background in defence and government, Matt has seen firsthand how military-style preparation can mean the difference between chaos and calm in high-stakes environments, when it really counts. And that mindset inspired the founding of Fifth Domain, a platform helping organisations simulate real-world incidents, measure cyber capability, and transform internal teams into highly skilled cyber defenders. So thank you, Jason, for joining me as my co-host always, and thank you, Matt, for joining us today. And Jason, over to you for the first question.
And thanks for the magnificent intro there, Tommy. I think they can top and tail that at Fifth Domain and use that, I think, for their promotional purposes. That
That's
was
right.
great work. They're very well distilled. Matt, yeah, thanks for joining us, mate. It's as Tom said off the top, it's there's a lot to unpack there. So probably, if you wouldn't mind just going back in time to sort of how you started and how you got into Fifth Domain and what Fifth Domain means. A lot of people are probably not sure on that as well. Just give us sort of a bit of a chronological history. As we always say, Vaughan Shanks went all the way back to birth and talking about, paper cuts and all that sort of stuff. But, maybe just go a little bit further chronologically than that up the chain.
Yes, sounds good. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Tom. So I guess my journey in cyber started really when I was studying postgraduate at a university in Australia. So I come from a non-traditional cyber background. So my first degree was in film and television. So I basically learnt how to analyze film, use cameras and etc. like this. And then I realized that, hey, this is great, interesting, but it's probably not going to be the career I want. Now, I've always had an interest in security. I worked, as a security guard during university and so forth. So I had an appetite, and I love technology as well. So I decided to go out and enroll in a Masters of Information Security and Intelligence. So this was before it was called cyber; it was called information security. So basically, I went out and from my arts background, went into a computer science classroom and really was just out of my depth. And I really had these moments where I'm like, what am I doing here? I don't even know how to use anything more than a web browser and a word processor. And I'm trying to then, do packet analysis on traffic and things like this. And so essentially, I decided, at a very, that I had sliding doors moments, to keep going or to give up, and I decided to keep going. And so what I had to do is essentially learn, methodologies, practices, and habits and approaches to learning, technical cyber. And so that's sort of, a bit of a precursor to Fifth Domain, and I'll come back to that in a second. So essentially, out of that, I successfully applied, and it was got entry into the Defense Signals Director at the time as a graduate, and so essentially went through, spent 5 years as a in cyber predominantly, working in cyber operations, and so did that. Now, at the same time, I actually entered or enlisted as an Army Reserve officer training. So essentially, for 3.5 years through the same time of DSD, I was learning around how to conduct land warfare. So as an officer, you learn how to analyze missions, analyze terrain, analyze enemy strengths, weaknesses, vulnerabilities, your own, conduct mission plans, and then execute them and lead a team. So while I was working in cybersecurity operations, I was also learning how to conduct land warfare. And so what I started to see is a lot of similarities between the cyber domain and the land domain. And so, coming to your questions, what is the fifth domain? So, if really, fifth domain is the fifth domain of warfare after land, sea, air, space, cyber. So, it's still warfare. It's still a lot of the tenets of warfare still apply to the cyber domain. And so, what I started to see and apply is innovating. How do you use land warfare methodologies to then into the cyber domain? And so when I left DSD, I went into consulting and then started teaching at UNSW ADFA around cyber operations. And so I wrote two of the foundational core units there around offensive and defensive cyber operations. And what I did is really innovate. How do you then do terrain analysis in the cyber domain? Taking the same methodologies of land warfare into it. How do you do mission analysis within the cyber domain? How do you understand your objective, your constraints, your resources, your equities as well? How do you then start to then use intelligence and so forth? So I started to teach people within, who were just wanting to do a master's degree in cyber operations. A lot of these people actually didn't come from IT backgrounds. This is the master's level, so they were doing it as part of professional development, or they were moving across from a different part of policy or national security into cyber, because that was the new thing around 2015, 16. And so what I taught people is a lot of those strategies that I applied myself when I was an arts graduate, learning IT and cybersecurity for the first time, and really taught them how to think and break down a problem, and not to look at it in terms of just purely the technology, but again, what are you trying to achieve here? What are your hypotheses? How do you test these hypotheses, and etc. And so really that's, in the education system, that's called, experiential theory, experiential learning theory, and it's around how you form hypotheses and do experiments and collect information and come back and then try again and again and again. And so this learning process is really what we've cooked into fifth domain. And this is really what the job is within cybersecurity, is the ability to be confronted with the challenge, be confronted with the limits of your own knowledge and abilities, and then to learn and then try again and test and adjust. So the way that you learn cybersecurity is really probably the most important thing, as that is really what the job is. So there is very little distinction between the approach that you take to learning cybersecurity and the approach you take to actually conducting cybersecurity. So seeing that, what I actually was really, I guess, saw a deficit within the cybersecurity industry at the time was that a lot of it was around how to use tools. So, you go and do vendor training certificates, and it was really around, essentially, it was just a feature tour of the technology, of what to do. It didn't really teach you how to think and apply and so forth, because at the end of the day, what you got to understand is that cyber operations is really a combat scenario. You're up against an adversary. Time is a resource. So they're trying to outwit you. And so you really need to understand that it's more about how you think and be able to outwit that adversary, as much around the technology. Technology is just a tool, an instrument, just like in conventional land warfare, a rifle or some other weapon. It's just a tool for you to move, through the terrain, traverse, and then create effects within that domain. So, but being an officer, being a thinker, is not about being able to use the tools. It's about how to actually, conduct operations and missions. And so, fifth domain is all about changing the minds and evolving the minds of the people, be able to then leverage the power and the investment that technology has, or people, organizations have made within it. So that's sort of a full circle of, where fifth domain has come, starting from my very, beginnings as an art graduate, trying to learn IT security, all the way in taking those lessons I've learned there, all the way through the military, all the way through DSD, and then to really crystallize it into using software as an experience to then cultivate and really accelerate the evolution of cyber operators.
It's quite a journey there, Matt. And one of the things that I'd be really interested to dig in a bit more is that the learnings, you get a lot of the best in the world in environments like ASD, but then when we jump outside and we look at other kind of really important industries, critical infrastructure, finance, I mean retail, all these kind of things are now being just compounded with heavy cyber attacks, and the ones that are of the size to have SOCs, literally just kind of grabbing platforms. Just dive in a bit more about how important that human capability is, and sort of why you brought that focus kind of out of the defense world, and trying to, I guess, uplift the skill sets in these commercial environments.
Absolutely. So technology will analyze data and provide insight but it doesn't make decisions. And so it's the human that makes a decision about whether to triage an alert, to close it, to keep it open, to investigate further, and so forth. It's that human that is actually making the decision and determining the outcome of the technology. And so if you've got, again, it's just a tool. The technology is just a tool. It's there to enable human decision making. And so if the human can't make the accurate decisions or interpret the data or the alerts or understand how to action it, then you're really losing any sort of investment that you've made in that technology. So it's not just a waste of money, but it's also a crutch that is really ineffective. So a lot of people think cyber is a technical domain, therefore it's a technical solution. It's really not at all. It's a people problem, because ultimately, coming back to my previous point, cyber exists because there is an adversary, there's a person on the other end of the wire trying to steal from you, trying to break into systems, trying to extort you, hold you to ransom. That's not a piece of technology doing that. It's a person. They're just using that technical domain. So you're not really fighting the technology, you're fighting the person. And so if you don't understand that what you're trying to achieve, is to defeat the person, then you're just going to end up maintaining technologies and becoming a system admin of security technologies. And I think I see it a lot within the industry, where people they lose sight of what's important. They don't see, the forest for the trees. They think about opening tickets, closing tickets, configuring, following process, and etc. And that's not really, it becomes too procedural and predictable. And that's probably a key thing as well, is that if you become predictable, if your defenses become predictable, they can be circumvented. It is when the element of surprise, of unpredictable, behaviors. I mean, that's why adversaries collect intelligence on your habits and locations and abilities, because they want to understand, well, where are the gaps? Where can I actually then, how can I conduct my operation to fit between your habits and routines and etc. like this? So if you're predictable, then it's easy to blend in and circumvent any sort of defenses. So coming back to the original point, is that you really need tools aren't enough. Tools are just a tool. Technology is just a tool. You can't hold a piece of technology accountable, because it's just processing data. It's really the human that's making the decision and really determining the outcome for the organization.
Can you give us just some idea on where it's best to use? So best use cases. So like, where is this product and service best actually added? Who sort of is going to benefit most from this?
So for Fifth Domain, Fifth Domain platform is a platform as a suite of different, we say, events, right? So you can have CTF competitions, you can have skills assessments or courses. So it provides a different type of events. Now, you can use this. We have three decisions. So essentially, when you're managing a security operations team, there's three decisions you can make. It is basically recruit, recruit who you want to hire. You can then restructure, and then you can develop skills. So essentially, those are the three decisions that we help with. So when you're recruiting or promoting someone, I conduct these skills assessments. You can do competitions and so forth. When you want to restructure, you can look at, conducting, ongoing learning, ongoing CTFs, ongoing, periodic skills assessments for promotions. You can then get a picture of your skills inventory within your organization and compare it against your skills requirements. And then essentially, like Tetris, just mix and match and assemble, the best people to the best jobs and etc. And then there's skill development, so you can actually assign people roles, and so the platform, you can design custom roles and skills requirements for every different role, and then assign a person to that role, and then you can see the gap of what their current skills are to then what they're trying to achieve. And so essentially you can just provide them, and the platform has the smarts to be able to assign them training, which is going to fill those gaps. So essentially it's organizations which really have probably larger workforces. So they have some complexity where they may not have direct engagement with their team. Some of our customers who really like what we do, they have global workforces. So they have 24 by 7, SOCs as a service. They have people in different parts of the world, different countries. And they really want to maintain a certain standard of service and quality of service. And so what Fifth Domain does is be able to then baseline everyone across the organization to then say, well, okay, well, this type, this service, this organization, this crew in this country at this level and so forth like that. So it's really about bringing observability into your skills of your team, just like within conventional cyber operations, you bring observability into network activity. So it fits very nicely with conventional, the mindsets of cyber operations. Just like people look at, data or data-driven cyber operations, this is really, data-driven, cyber force operations.
It's really cool, and I want to kind of touch on something you've put on a couple of times. You mentioned a few times here is the warfare. We are at war. Jason and I often talk about this. We are in a cyber war. We're being constantly cyber attacked. Yet it's almost something that gets vanillaized in the conversations around the industry. So just kind of pull that thread a bit for us. And why do you think there's a challenge in assigning it the language that really it deserves? Do you think?
Yeah, so Fifth Domain, we've come out in front and said, it is the fifth domain of warfare, it's acknowledged and etc. Unpacking why organizations should adopt a mindset of warfare is very multifaceted. So essentially today in the geopolitical space, there is a concept around gray zone operations. So these are where it's not conventional warfare where someone invades. It is maintaining a certain level of hostile activity which stays below, the threshold of declaring war, for example. Okay, so they're called grey zone operations. It's not black as in total war, and it's not white as in total peace. It's grey zone operations, etc. Then what you've got to understand is how the cyber domain really is across all aspects of society. So you've got the grey zone operations concept. Then you've got cyber and the fact that it is sits across industry and so forth. That's really those two things is what's actually starting to you know draw in or bleed warfare into an organization. Um, Plus the fact that you've got some countries where they have militaries, government organizations who outsource hacker groups, to then conduct operations on their behalf. They're allowed to conduct those operations and not be prosecuted because essentially they're providing some benefit back to the state and so forth. So you get this real blend or, blurred lines between military, civilian, commercial entities. And that is why really you have to then think about from the defensive perspective about adopting a similar type of porous boundaries or silos between military and intelligence and government and the commercial sector. So the concept of cyber warfare and why we push it because it's really just a jolt to the system of society to go, hey, you are being pulled into this operations. You're being targeted by military and intelligence services from around the world. They think like this. In order to defeat them and defend against them, you need to think like that also. So if you're not thinking about that adversary, again, it's the difference between IT security and IT operations, where you're just managing, the IT, and you're really sort of, protecting against malfunctions and misconfigurations. You're not actually within cyber operations. You're actually then, combating that person. So there are a lot of tenets around warfare. And as I've learned coming through, learning around land warfare, it's a lot of similarities between into the cyber domain as well. So I think really why we push hard on this cyber warfare is really just a bit of a wake up call to say, hey, society, you're being targeted by these people. They are thinking and they approach like this. You need to then adopt some of that thinking and in order to combat and defend against them.
One of the things, Matt, I remember in a previous conversation that I thought was really cool feature of your platform as well was the way it kind of helps find undiscovered talent across an organization. Tell us a little bit more about how you've gone about doing that and some of the stories you shared about finding some amazing talent that people just didn't even know was in their workforce to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a big thing around, capture the flag competitions, etc. This is a real entryway for people to get into, cyber operations and so forth. We've have customers who've conducted, CTF competitions, fun CTF competitions, within their organization, not just for the cyber team, but for the wider organization as part of a cyber awareness month or some other aligned activity. Now, what they've found is that they have been people in IT, just general IT, network operations, infrastructure operations, who have actually performed really well within these, cyber CTF activities. Um, Now, some of the feedback was, why hadn't these people done cyber before? Is because really they haven't had time. They didn't know what cyber was, right? So they thought there was this massive journey or this big body of knowledge that they had to go to university for years and so forth to then learn cyber, when really they're just like, well, yeah, this is just sort of like system administration, but you're actually then trying to discover someone's behavior and not just a technology malfunction. So yeah, I can do that. So that's where, there was, and they get so excited, these customers, because instead of having to go out and do all this recruitment and bring graduates in and onboard them to the culture in the organization, essentially they just say, hey, look, come across and work for us. You already know the IT infrastructure, you know the culture, you know the organization. Just come and do this, what you did in the CTF, in the SOC. And so they love that. They love it that they can actually then have a way to then show people what cyber is, but also then to identify the talent. So we've had some really good, examples and really feel good stories around helping, CISOs and SOC managers, fill those, workforce gaps within their organization.
Matt, I'd love you to dive back into some of the startup journey because it's a real challenge in Australia, growing a business up and kind of finding the right clients and heading over to RSA in San Francisco in a few weeks and stuff like that, which you're going to be swamped with some of the biggest global players out there. So, what is the startup journey? What are some of the challenges you face, kind of building Fifth Domain up, and where are you hoping to kind of take it the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So, yeah, look, it's what's what's some of the lessons from Fifth Domain? Probably all of them. Um,
Don't do it again
it's
if you had the time back.
Yeah.
yeah, like I don't. To be honest, like I don't even know if I'd do it better a second time. You know what I mean?
No,
I'd
yeah.
still, step on the landmines. It'd just be different landmines, right?
Mm.
And probably that's probably the key thing, is that no matter how much you prep or how much you've got advisors or whatever like that, there's going to be you got to step on landmines, right? It is just a hostile environment, but it's highly rewarding at the same time. And so I think, if there's sort of, one lesson, um, if there's one lesson, I could sort of, propagate, and, it would be sort of, a core thing. It's really around ensuring that you find your rhythm within the business, find your frequency. And so, when people you know do startups, right? They see the unicorns, they see this company's doing this, and they see the news articles of, hey, this company's just raised this much money, or this, and so forth. And so that's really like, the social media side of, the reality. That's just a snapshot. Um, what they don't understand, and and think some organizations or some startups think, oh, okay, well, I've got to aim for that. I've got to look like that. I've got to get this ARR. I've got to be product led. I've got to be like them. And I think you got to find your own stripes, and you got to be comfortable with your own frequency and your own ability to grow and have, make your house out of bricks, so to speak. It's going to take time. and it's going to be hard work, but that is actually what provides you strength and resilience, is just doing the one thing that is really, passionate about, that you're good at, and that customers want, right?
Mm.
So there's
Well,
a
that's the key thing, Matt. That's the key thing out of all of it is, there's no use building something that no one wants, no matter how passionate you are, there's no
yep,
use running in an easterly direction looking for a sunset, right? So you got to make sure, and I think this is one of the things that, and sometimes you don't have to build the sexy stuff, as you say, it's not about you're building the sexy stuff. Sometimes the most boring stuff has the least competition, but it's the stuff that's most required. And I think that's where we need to take a step back in cyber and say, especially here in Australia, what are we building for what's required? I think a lot of times that in the past, one of the places we've sort of fallen over as a nation is we're not building stuff which is actually for that top 5 or top 10, requirements that the actual industry is looking for. Yours fills a gap, and I think you've got the reverse is that people just aren't aware of it. Like it's like it is a requirement, it is a need, but people just aren't aware. So the two sides of the coin too is actually how do you get found, how do you find your ideal customers, and all those sorts of things are the key aspects. So and fuck it, just go and do it, and if it fails, at least the stuff you learn, if you ever did start again, you've got a knowledge base that you can sort of build off. I've said before, I've fucked up more times than I've actually been successful in business, but it's
mm,
what you learn, and it's those challenging elements that you go through where you actually get the best benefit from. That's where the real gold lies in the fuck ups and actually trying to fix things and finding solutions to stuff. The things that flow sometimes easily are not the best things for your business or for you personally. It's the struggle and actually getting through the challenges and working out solutions for things which really make a difference. And that's what you've done with Fist Mate. Along the journey, I've known you for a while, and Tom and I have seen that journey. And it's the pivots and the seeing where you need to go, what you need to do next, and putting together a good team as well. Which again, I think you've done. I think there's some from an observational point of view, some of the things you've done, which I think make you sort of sit, a level above a lot of people in the startup industry here in Australia.
yeah, thanks. I think yeah, team, when you're focused in on your purpose and what you're doing, and you're uncompromising in what that is, that will attract the right team.
Mm,
When I've hired the wrong people is when I've tried to take the business in a direction that is not true to my
yeah.
values and what I want and my differentiation, and from all sorts of things, right? So I think
Mm,
coming back to you know, making sure that you maintain, what your true spots are. If you try to camouflage yourself and dress yourself up as something you're not, you'll attract a different species, of
yeah.
people that you don't really need, right? So by showing your true colors and staying true to that, you actually attract the right customers and the right team for the business.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. That's it.
Are you so like a SOC is something that in my head when I first kind of dived into cyber, I expected to see the ASD or in Department of Defense and stuff like that. So where are you seeing these kind of these SOCs being built in different kind of industries now, because they're all facing the same kind of attacks, and cyber criminals, foreign state actors, they're all seeing these kind of opportunities, and we know North Korea is chasing a huge amount of Bitcoin and stuff like that, so everyone's having to protect it. So where are you seeing the people that are kind of diving and building these skill sets, and where do you think are some of the industries that could really do with kind of accelerating their journey into building SOCs in an enterprise sense?
Yeah. So starting off with who are the organizations? I think anyone that really has a reputation or a trust of data, or relies on their business, relies on trust of their customers. And so that can be, holding information, or it can be delivering a service like critical infrastructure and so forth like this. So it's really where people have given up a degree of autonomy, or money to then have trust. And so and that's mostly, predominantly within things like government. There is, citizens give up parts of their rights, to then maintain law and order and etc. like this. And so and they expect governments to have protection, and protect
Mm,
them. Critical infrastructure, banking, insurance, probably where there is the need, but it's probably not as for, as mass consumers or mass citizens is around the legal industry. You think about, you go to, lawyers when, there is, considerable risk, right? That basically lawyers protect you and they have enormous amounts of sensitive information about you and other people and so forth. Now, not everyone uses, legal services, but that's where I think there is probably where the danger where they haven't really, and we've seen these, hacks, in the last few years around, legal firms, but they don't have a culture. It's a different culture. It's not a tech culture. It's very professional. They outsource potentially some of their, IT to, a third party or etc. But you can outsource services, but you can't outsource risk. It's always going to come back to you, even if you've got, a third party saying, "Yep, we will provide these services, these security services, etc." Um, at the end of the day, if you get compromised and people's information is compromised, they're going to blame you. They don't care about your
Mm.
service provider, right? And what they've done. They're looking at you. They've put their trust in you, and you've broken that trust. And so I think, around, the legal profession, I think that's probably some of the, the challenges which we're facing at the moment, is culturally how do then legal firms start to then improve their cybersecurity? Within an IT operations, is the machine running? Is infrastructure back up the capacity we need? Yes or no? Like there's no binary, there's no ambiguity about it. It's either, yeah, it is fixed or it's not fixed. But I think within cyber, because we just don't know, people are accepting this ambiguity around, it could be a threat, it could not be a threat, it could be this threat actor, they could have done this, they could have done that. We're not sure. And I think what we really need to solve is, basically SOC managers going back to them going, in a matter of words, going, "Hey, would you bet your job on your decision?" I'm not saying that, you're going to be fired, but, like, would you or not? Oh, no, probably not. Well, go back and run it down to the ground until you are 99.9% sure that this is, a false positive, or what the extent of the damage is. And so the two benefits out of that is, one, the person's going to learn, right? The person's going to investigate. They're going to learn new technologies. They're going to have to investigate threats. They're going to have to learn about all sorts of parts of, the threat actors. And that comes back to my first point, is where the job is a constant experiential learning cycle, right? Where you're having to learn and so forth. And the second benefit of doing that is that you actually protect the organization, and you give the organization, um, basically, if something has happened, you're going to derive a whole bunch of lessons learned that you can then implement to then strengthen the posture of the organization. There's just too much, forgive my, blank language. It's too much half-assedness around people doing cyber operations, where it becomes about numbers and processes and so forth like this. It's just, and that's what's, if I was an adversary, I'd love that. I would love the apathy. I'm gonna hit someone, who's just apathetic and ambivalent and so forth. And to be honest, unpacking all of this, that's where a lot of MSSPs, why organizations who have MSSPs or SOCs as a service get targeted, because those MSSPs, they might be talented, but they don't have the full context. They're not able to run that down. They are looking from a certain distance. They can't then investigate and go deeper and deeper and deeper into the organization in order to remediate that and chase that to get down to the ground. Plus, at the same time, they probably don't have time, because they don't have real ownership, right? Because it's not their organization. They have to move on to the next customer, etc. So MSSPs, organizations that have MSSPs, are a great target because of those reasons. But also there's, this degree of, communication and coordination that has to happen between the MSSP and that customer, right? And so all
Mm.
you're doing as an adversary is basically exploiting the complexity or the time lags between all the coordination happening, to respond to an incident.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you apologise for such strong language, because Tom and I are very careful about using strong language on this podcast. We rarely, if ever, swear. So thank you for the warning. I might need to use that a bit more, Tommy, when I'm going
Yeah,
off.
Yeah.
Just a warning. There's an F-bomb coming up here somewhere.
I think you
language
undercooked it
warning,
with
Triple J.
half-assed, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, the
So what do you
half-assed. Yeah, I'm
reckon?
glad you said that.
Yeah. What do you reckon then? Well, I mean, the most polite way to say it is, the rules based geopolitical order is kind of up in the world. Trade
Mm,
is being smashed left, right, and center. We're having to see businesses dynamically shift. Hearing stories of Apple flying planes of iPhones out to India and other places to kind of get around the new US tariffs and stuff like that. So, is this the biggest risk organizations should be focusing on now, or is it just one of many and it's not going to change? What do you kind of see as the red lights that, CISOs and SOC managers should really be kind of focusing on right now and highlighting up to the senior leadership and board members?
That it's not business as usual, right? Like that, you can't in new circumstances with new influences and new forces, you can't do what you've always done and expect the same result. It's a different recipe. It's a different chemistry. Yep. There's a famous management book called Who Moved My Cheese? I
mm,
don't know if you guys know it, right? But
yeah.
basically, yep, you can't. The cheese is moved
Mm,
basically within the world, and you have to adapt. So what does that mean? So for me, I am, a patriot. I love Australia. I'm all about Australia's protection and defense and etc. Um, we need to wake up and learn from history that, the last 80 years is not going to be the same as the next 80 years, right? There are cycles within the world and so forth. Um, Australia needs to learn how to step up and, really think about, sovereign supply chain, sovereign capability, um, because at the end of the day, if we put the warning or the alarm out, or for the US or some other ally to come help us, um, there's no guarantees they will, right? And
mm,
so we've got to get around this and start to think about, holy crap, what if we can't get services or technologies, or what if cables start getting cut,
mm.
across the Pacific and etc. What happens then? Um, are they going to,
Elon Musk becomes our best mate, and we get Starlink everywhere.
yeah,
That's
Starlink, right?
yeah.
Things like
Go
this.
the
Like,
go the Ukrainian model. Yeah.
I have Starlink, right? And I'm already starting to
Mm,
look and going, what are the Australian alternatives, right?
yep.
Because what happens if Starlink gets turned off, or
Mm,
you don't know what's going to happen within, the US at the moment when, these decisions that are getting made, right? But what if
mm,
they're like, nah, we're not servicing Australia anymore for Starlink.
yep. And
So
this is
it's
the problem
like,
for us, isn't it, across the board? And we've had conversations about this, and I've done a lot of posts on it. That Australia is so apathetic and so reliant on so many other things. China for our resources, and America and UK are going to come in and rescue us on the white horse if anything goes wrong. But we are a sitting duck, just sitting right out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by all these adversaries. And we are focused on, I mean, both parties at the moment focused on housing plans, which will bump up the cost of houses. That there is no
yeah,
long-term fix. It's all short-term thinking about how do we win the next election, rather than what longer term. I mean, China think in 100-year cycles, like in what they plan for, until people stop and actually look at these sorts of things for what they are, and stop fixating and focusing on the wrong things, gas price, electricity, all this bullshit that they do, and property prices and everything like that. The biggest thing that'll fuck this country is a proper cyber attack, cutting off critical infrastructure and stuff like that. That'll fuck this country quicker than anything else, but it's getting scant regard at the moment. So yeah, that's my 2 cents worth. But yeah, that's where I think we're sitting at the moment.
yeah, I think it's, we haven't, like, there's no vision for Australia
No,
of,
none.
who we are, and
Yep.
go, this is Australia, the world's changing, and taking a position.
Let that sink in. It is cyber warfare. This
Mm,
great nation of Australia has an opportunity to become a cyber leader and to have an incredible culture of cyber. And year on year, and since Jason and I met at Cyber, and I met you around the same time, Matt, we haven't seen any big shifts or any tectonic changes. It's just
We're not
business as
backing our
usual.
businesses like Fifth
We're
Domain,
not backing
like
businesses.
back
Yep.
back our own businesses. Like it's
Yeah.
just we don't back our own. That's the other thing is too. They'd rather pick a foreign company that doesn't understand the ecosystem here and stuff than back and support our companies. That's the other thing. We'll go to RSA and you watch the culture over in the US. They're more entrepreneurial. They will back companies. They really go chips all in. They raise $38 million or $40 million for a round of funding, not pissing around for $1 or $2 or $3 million as we do here. It's just a different world. And until we grow up and grow the fuck up, we're not going to get anywhere. That's the problem. We play little, we play small, and we tall poppy syndrome people, and it's just an embarrassment. And when you go overseas and you look back at our country, it's great to come back because it's a great country to live because it's the country that it is, but it's not great in so many other ways that we need it to be a livable place for the citizens.
Yeah, and people think, I think there's a broken idea where industries are based on innovation. They're not. Industries are based on customers. Right?
Yep.
Industries
Correct.
are based on transactions happening. And so as Australians, we innovate. I think we're probably the best innovators in the world, right? We're the
Mate,
best
stuff like
innovators.
Wi-Fi's from here, Maps, Google Maps from here,
Not even that.
like
Like we've had
translates.
to come in, and we're a bit rebellious Australians, and rebels are always looking for a different way to do things, right? They're looking for a better way. We don't accept it. We want, we're no bullshit, people. We're wanting to, we're a little bit anti-authority, and anti-authority means that, hey, just because you're doing it that way doesn't mean that's the best way of doing it, and so we innovate. Now, the issue is that this innovation, potentially dies or it goes overseas, right? Because it needs customers. So innovation is the starting point, but unless you've got an industry supporting that, then essentially that innovation goes nowhere. It's the seed, but it's the seedling, but it goes nowhere. And so you look at or countries, like Israel and the US and so forth, which we go, oh wow, they've got great cyber tech. No, sure, I'm not going to comment about the tech. What they've got is a great industry, is a great incubator for industry, and so they know that people come out of the Defense Force, Israeli Defense Force, they build things, they productize things, and they've got 5 customers, enterprise customers straight away with their prototype that they can knock on the door and they'll give them the opportunity to grow and develop. And then the next 5 and the next 5, right? And they know that they will do that and get the company to a certain size. They'll sell it to a US, vendor and so forth. And then that money goes back into, bringing up the next cycle, right? So it's a complex ecosystem, but I think Australia there is no feedback loop. It's dig it up, send it away, that's it, sort of thing. So essentially, we're not retaining or getting any sort of, way to then, bring that back to Australia. So that's the issue.
And that's it. The 348 million that was raised for Australian startups in the last year, not one cent of it come from Australian VCs or anyway, right? And this is the other issue. So. But we'll let Tom wrap it up, or else we'll just keep going, and then that'll upset Tom when he's going to edit this.
Oh, look, that's all fine. Look, I think listeners, there's been a lot of big call to actions here, but basically, follow Matt Wilcox on LinkedIn and jump on the Fifth Domain. Have a look at the website. Reach out if you've got a SOC. I guarantee you they'll run a free trial for you. They'll get inside and show you something that you never even were aware of that you had. And plus, when you dive into it, that opportunity to dive into your workforce and actually find undiscoverable talent, people that would be great working in your SOC. There's multifacets to this tool, which I think is a real game changer. So thank you, Matt, for joining us. Thank you, Jason, as my co-host as always.